as we were spending time visiting places and checking out all the amazing sights, one thing really hits you when you go to America, if you've been, is that everyone drives on the wrong side of the road. Well, they say it's the right side of the road, and it is the right side of the road, but it's not the right side to me. It's the wrong side. Okay. And so Brett was driving. He's very confident. He's been there a couple times, and he was doing a great job. But around day 5, he said, "It's your turn." And this is the picture he snapped. I don't know if this was like the last picture of Jacob he wanted to get before. But he said, no, I'm going to give you the keys. It's your turn. Give it a go. So I sat in the driver's seat and I looked in the rearview mirror with all the rest of the South Queensland church pastors, the Parkridge church pastor, one from out in Emerald. And so we're sitting there and I look in the rearview mirror and just shock and horrors on all their faces. They're like, "Jacob's driving? Why? He's never driven in America. We're going to die." They weren't so vocal, but that's what I imagined based on their facial expressions. But Brett just calmly in his manner, if you've met him, he is a very quiet and stable force. He just said, "You'll be fine." And he sat in the passenger side. And I was used to sitting in that seat because, as you can tell, I like to talk. So I was great for keeping the driver awake and the rest of the van alive because we don't want the driver to fall asleep, especially when I've said, "Let's go somewhere fun at 10 o'clock at night." But he just said, "He'll be fine." And as I started to pull out into the road, I'm looking to see for oncoming traffic, the proper thing to do. And he says, "You need to look to the other way." I'm like, "Right, we're going the wrong way. Okay, yes." And so he kept directing me, but never once was there fear in his eyes, or at least fear that he showed. And I think this, for me, has actually taught me what it means to be a disciple. I got to watch, but then a time came where he said, "It's your turn." And he put the keys in my hand, and he sat in the wrong seat, and he forced me to go and sit in the driver's seat. See, Jesus did a very similar thing. Jesus' movement didn't just come to a halt because Jesus wasn't around. Jesus' movement has continued to this day. There are still people that love and know of Jesus, that know his words, even though the man never wrote anything. There are people that are impacted by his healings and his impact, even though he is not directly standing before us right here. Instead, he has invested himself in people. And we believe that he reveals himself through people. He called, he trained, and then he sent disciples. And those disciples have impacted us to this day. One disciple who we're exploring is Matthew. If you look in Matthew chapter 9, verse 9, Matthew is a tax collector, the human version of email spam. This is a person that is a tax collector who annoys you, who asks for your money, and who tells you that if you don't keep it up, if you don't pay your dues, then you will end up in prison. And he's working for the enemy, for the Romans. So he is a hated man, but Jesus comes to him in Matthew chapter 9, verse 9, says, "Follow me and be my disciple." At that moment, it is a Matthew-changing moment, but I also think it's an earth-changing moment because Matthew will be responsible for putting down into words Jesus' very words he spoke to his disciples. And we will hear of Jesus through this man, through Matthew. He invited to walk with Jesus. He was invited to learn from him, to question him, to live with him. And it even says that the next day that Matthew invited all his mates over and they hung out at Jesus' place and they spent time. And the people that came to spend time with Jesus were the kind of people you'd never see alive or present in a synagogue. Jesus taught in the streets and often related to people who would never come in contact with him otherwise. And he chose Matthew to be one of those people. See, I think Matthew, like me, is invited to hear the word of God, to hear the gospel, not for myself, but for others. I hear to share, I learn to teach, I'm called to call. That is the Matthew way, and that is why we're exploring his gospel this month. And he has these words at the very end of his book. And I invite you, if you have the Bible app now, or if you have a physical Bible, open it up for yourself and see the words written there. Matthew chapter 28, beginning in verse 18. It's the final 3 verses of the book. It's the final words that Matthew wanted us to kind of leave there in the end of our mind as we closed his book and we've finished reading the story. I'm starting here because I'd like us to actually read and listen to Matthew this month from the perspective of the end. What's it all driving to? And these are the words that he records Jesus saying to 11 disciples on the Mount of Galilee after Jesus is raised again. It says in verse 17 that they saw him with their own eyes, they worshipped him, but still some doubted. This is an encouraging verse for me, and I love to share it before I get into our main bit, because there can be people that have just gone through the month of March and have heard these messages about Jesus and his interaction with strangers and how they came and were impacted. But these are people who are disciples who watched that and they themselves were impacted, but still had questions. Good. Excellent. Bring your doubts, bring your questions. It says they worship still. And Jesus still says these final words to him. It's called the Great Commission because it is the greatest challenge to us. The invitation to move forward, to be followers of Jesus, to be disciples. And these are the words, maybe well known to some of you, maybe to some of you the first time. Read along with me. Matthew 28, verses 18 and 20. I have all authority in heaven and on earth. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. See, Jesus' life was for others. Jesus gave everything for the sinful, broken world that he came to be part of. And at the end of it, he is assuring them that he has not lost, but he has been victorious over the worst enemy of humanity, death itself. And here he promises now that it's not just for himself, but it's now for them. One thing that captures my attention is that the people that he is speaking with still have issues. And as we read the Gospels and as we read the rest of the New Testament, you'll see them. They have questions, they have challenges, they stuff up frequently. They argue, but still Jesus says, you are to be my disciples, you are to teach, you are the ones to go. At the core of being a disciple is not perfection. It's not what? Fantastic, I'm glad some of us are still here. It's not perfection, but progress. That's the word I want you to remember. What is it? Progress. Forget the first word, remember the second. To be a disciple of Jesus implies that there is much learning and improving. If I say I'm a disciple, if I say I'm a student, that means I have something to grow in. There is an end goal that I'm working towards, maybe an exam, maybe a certification. And so Jesus, by calling us disciples and calling his followers disciples, immediately reminds us day after day that as you walk with him, there is still more to learn. There is still more to the road. You have not reached the destination yet. Now, here's the cool thing, and this is what we've structured April's sermons around. There are 5 sermons that Matthew has pulled together and has put throughout his book or his story or his gospel of Jesus. 5 sermons, and you can notice them if you have red letter Bibles, that the words of Jesus become these big blocks. And the first of those is Matthew chapter 5 to 7, 3 chapters, a sermon of Jesus that he preached on the mountain to his disciples. And that picture was awesome, Carly, which you kind of gave us a nice image in our mind. There's a picture of us, of disciples sitting on hills and listening to Jesus. And it says that he began to teach them. Matthew chapter 5, he brought them to himself. The crowds were there too, but it's his disciples that he immediately teaches to. This is important. It'll come up often. And these are the words that he starts to share about his kingdom, about his values, about what makes Jesus different to every other teacher that's teaching in Israel at the time and every other teacher that came before him. And he would even say every other teacher after. And these are the words, Matthew chapter 5, verse 3. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. And blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. A word that will hit you over and over again is the word blessed. In some translations, it says happy, which is in essence the same core meaning. To be makarios, to be happy, to be blessed, is to flourish in this life, to live the good life, to experience no misery, to experience the best of the best that you could imagine. And he repeats this 9 times in total. But the fascinating thing that captures me is this is not a word that Jesus has monopoly on. He's not the only person that uses this word in this way. And I want to take you somewhere a little bit unusual to show this. This is a picture taken from an ancient wall that has, seen many civilizations live in this area, but this is in Babylon. And in this wall of a city in the region of what would now be Iraq, there is a section of the wall that they've dug up. And this place is formerly called Dura Europus. Now, this is what's cool about it. It is the first picture in history of someone drawing Jesus. It's the first picture of somebody who drew Jesus. Now, I can tell that when you're squinting and you're wondering where he is, so let me zoom in a bit closer. Let me encourage us artists, when you draw your stick figures, maybe your artwork could end up in posterity. Maybe years from now, people will look at your drawings. We kind of look at the children's Sabbath school drawings, and I wonder, what do I do with my son's drawings that he brings to me that has macaroni stuck to it or cotton ear tips or something? And I wonder, what do I do with this? But what I have no doubt about is this interesting piece of art. It is a picture of Jesus, and this was a house church. Imagine it. Not a church in a beautiful building like this, but in an old, scungy, dingy wall of a city that's falling apart. This is where the Christians met. This was the only place they could meet. There were synagogues in town, and there were temples dedicated to Dionysus and all the other Greek gods, but they chose to meet in a little wall, a little house in the wall. And if you can see it, I don't know if you picked it yet, you've been trying to explore this picture. Let me use this pointer. You can see this is the figure, and there is a sheep or a goat or some sort of creature there on his back, and so he's carrying him. And so a lot of historians think this is a shepherd's depiction. But there is one other little detail that's important for today that I want to show you. And it's hard to see here, but you can see a little sash coming down over Jesus' torso. And what's fascinating about this is that in the ancient world, the people who wore sashes like this were the philosophers. The philosophers, the people who would sit and think about, what does it mean to run a country? Or what does it mean that there is a God? Or what does it mean that we are human beings? Or what does it mean to think? Do you ever have people like this in your friend group that really overthink things? Yeah, philosophers, we need them. In the modern day, philosophers are about knowing nothing. In the ancient world, is about knowing something about life. And more importantly, wisdom. How do we know what is the good way to live? That's what the question was always about. Plato and Socrates, they would ask these questions. They would ask important questions about, what does it mean for a human to flourish, to be happy, and to have a civilization that flourishes and is happy? But even today, or closer today, people like Karl Marx, he even asked this question. His answers have resulted in much pain and misery, but he still asked the question. And Friedrich Nietzsche and many others, I know this is a popular one that's getting around now, is Jordan Peterson. I mean, he released a book about the 12 simple rules of life for what? For flourishing. People still ask this question. Oprah, when she was a big thing, was getting people on stage to talk about this. Andrew Tate, even he asked these questions. But here is something that I want to point out very quickly. People have asked these questions all the time and have offered answers, but humans often give these answers that create more pain. Sometimes they get some things right and they articulate some interesting aspects, but no one ever gives this big picture explanation for what it means to live the good life. I would suggest that there is only one who has done that and has done it well, and that is Jesus. Jesus presents to us a knowledge, a philosophy, a way of living that works. And it doesn't just work for one person, it can work for everyone. And how do I know it works? Because Jesus himself lived it. He demonstrated what the good life is to live. The interesting thing is, somebody pointed out to me once that the Old Testament is really also offering a philosophy of life, isn't it? The Old Testament offers you many different things. And this is a quote that I like from an author named Pennington. That's his surname. And he says this: the point of Israel's history is not simply to give you facts. Sometimes we read the Bible and we get really good at learning the trivia, and we understand that who was the parent of Jacob was Isaac, and who was the parent of Isaac was Abraham, and we can learn all these little details and these stories, but that's not the main point. The main point was to cast a vision of the good, perfect world to be a part of. What does it mean to live a true and a good life? These are the kind of questions that the Bible is answering. And it offers an answer, and it offers it primarily in the context of this story where God is calling us and inviting us to be part of his family. Now, as I read the Bible, that family has a lot of issues. But if we understand it clearly, even though they have stuff-ups, even though they have awkward people in their family, there is one in their family that really mattered, and that was Jesus. Why am I sharing these little bit nerdy facts with you? Firstly, when I pick up the Bible, I'm not doing it to tick a box. And I currently am with this Bible plan because it ticks a box literally when you finish a day. But what I am wanting to do is to absorb my life in the way of thinking of God's way of living. See, if it's a philosophy and I'm influenced daily by different types of ways of living, I need to center myself on a way of life that works and that is good for me, is good for my family, is good for my community, is good for my world. We absorb so much information from outside of us, from different ways of living. It could be on social media, it could be in a game we play, it could be even just with a friend we talk with. Somebody shared this alarming thought with me once. Jacob, you spend 30 minutes discipling people from the front, but you know what's scary? More than 24 hours a week, children are on their phones being discipled by the internet. What does 30 minutes mean in the grand scheme of that? I said, well, what am I supposed to do? He said, through your families, the family unit, the community that God has built as part of his image is supposed to be the core discipleship method of God's plan. We'll get into that in May, but for now, what I will just say is that personally, if I spend my time exploring this book and I spend it, letting it apply it to my life and letting it speak to me, it shapes my worldview, it shapes my choices, it shapes my actions, it shapes the way I respond when I'm under pressure. And I think, if applied properly, will make a person truly happy. We want to be happy, don't we? We want to flourish. Nobody wants to be miserable. Nobody wants to cry themselves to sleep at night. And so we think happiness can be achieved by something we eat, by something we drink, by something we buy, by someone we date, by something we own, or by something we win. Like that video very carefully and demonstrated to us. But Jesus' teaching here is the opposite. Listen to the words. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. In another version, it says, blessed are the poor and who know they have need. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. What a strange place to start. Blessed or happy, flourishing is the one who has nothing. In the West, we can't fathom that. But Jesus says, if you want to enter into my way of living, my kingdom is his terminology, the kingdom of heaven, then you start empty. And actually, if you follow the whole way through, you end empty. All of it is about nothing that you bring. Jesus' way begins with nothing or with no experience, no ability. See, there's a misunderstanding that I hear often, and maybe you've bought into this. It's an Australian philosophy that I'm a good person, and because I'm a good person, I'll make it into heaven. That's why I don't need this, right? And understandably, there's some reasons why they've come to that. Sometimes Christians have pushed them away, and I get that. But the misunderstanding is that if I offer myself, if I do something good, if I don't hurt anybody, the big man upstairs, he's going to say, great jobs, come on in. The Christian perspective, which is very different to the Australian philosophy, and can I just spend some time talking about the Australian philosophy? That philosophy came from convict and convict masters. It's slave mentality. Do your job, pay your bills, be a good citizen, and you're in. Otherwise, we'll kick you out and you have to go to New Zealand. Instead, the message of the gospel, Jesus' way, is you enter with nothing. You can't achieve anything. Paul wrote it like this, no one is good, no, not one. Nobody deserves to enter into God's kingdom. That's kind of the point. And the beautiful thing about it is that when I walk in those doors and I say that I'm a believer of Jesus, I don't come in and say, I've paid enough to get my seat. We actually don't have elite seats here. Box seats, VIP. Even if we did, I don't think anybody would want to take them because the front row always seems to be empty. But this is the thing. We mistake what it means to be a follower of Jesus by something we achieve because we think in the terms of membership. Being a Christian is like being a member of RSCQ. If I pay my fee, then they'll come and help me when I'm in trouble. It's exactly like the Australian philosophy of faith. That if I pay my way and I do the right thing, when I need it, God will help me. But I want to challenge us to stop thinking membership. We're not joining some AFL team membership or RSEQ, but we're entering into relationship. It's so much different. Imagine if I use that mentality with my son. Son, how's those drawings coming along? I know you've brought home quite a few from Sabbath school and they're looking great, but how are you doing? Oh boy, I'm really disappointed with this piece. I don't think this will work. Can you imagine speaking like that to a child or to a spouse or to a friend? Friendship, relationship, that is the method or the measurement of a discipleship. The great thing about that is no one has free pass. No one is more qualified to be a disciple. We all enter in the same door and we all have the same place around Jesus. So I want to take it now to the next step. If flourishing and being happy, as we've looked at, it's something that we actually catch through relationship, what does it look like? I want to show 3 examples from these Beatitudes. The first one is this one. I think it's good to see how we read scripture a little bit. And that's what I'm doing here. This is a bit of a moment for just understanding how to read the Bible. When we pick it up and we read it, the important questions that should be bouncing in our head is the who, the what, the where, the when, the how, and the why. The application. What does it mean to me today? And these questions are so important. So Jesus says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice or for righteousness, for they shall be filled. A follower of Jesus sees the injustice and the oppression of people around them. They're not threatened. They don't buy into the greater political discussions. Instead, what they do is they hunger and thirst to do something about it, to actually be the solution. When we see our friends from overseas coming and being treated differently to those who have grown up here, what does that do within us? Does it bring something within us that angers us? How about when we hear of or see the First Nations people and what they are experiencing? Does that bring up a hunger and thirst to support or to cross our arms and shake our heads? Because this is what Jesus is saying, if I'm understanding him correctly. Justice, or God's way of ordering society and living, should call us to care for those that are in need, for the homeless, for the orphan. In fact, God himself defines himself as the father of the orphan and the husband of widows. Why? Because he has an intense desire for them. He has a hunger for their well-being. And this is the promise. If you hunger and thirst for it, you will be filled. Later in the sermon, Jesus says, do to others as you'd have them do to you. This was not to invite us to be passive, but to say, if I was on the street, if I was homeless, how would I want to be treated? If I was hungry and I couldn't afford my next meal, how would I want to be treated? Can you see how impactful this way of living is? We can't hide from it. It actually takes over every part of our life. Where would this apply to, or who would this apply to? So no one would be off limits. Check this next one out. Now, I must pause and just say before I go to the next one. If you feel a little bit uncomfortable or a little bit tense, or you find this might be a little bit tricky, good. That's kind of the point. Jesus' way is not your way. It's a new way of doing things. But if applied, what could it do? Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. What if we in our relationship, rather than keeping score or trying to get even or be the last one with the final word, what if we used mercy instead? What kind of mercy would we give and what kind of mercy would we receive? Jesus said not to hate our enemies, but to turn our cheek and to forgive them, to love our enemies. That's in the same sermon. He even invites us to pray for those who have done something against us and to ask for forgiveness so that we may be forgiven. This is a challenging way to live, isn't it? But what would it look like if we did it? Do you think our families would be happier? Do you think we would exude a bigger influence on the world around us? Do you think it would change people's lives? I absolutely think so. Here's one more. 3 is a magic number, so let's do 3. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. The Old Testament says that the one who gets to see God and ascend his hill is the one that hasn't filled their life with idols, the one that has filled their life with other treasures. And later in Jesus' sermon, he even has this line where he says, where your treasure is, you may remember the rest of it. there your heart will be also. He invites us not to lay up treasures on earth, but treasures in heaven, because there's so many things that want to control us, so many idols. And I was reflecting on this. Money, the thing that we often spend most of our life consumed working for and accruing, is a God at its core. It's not a very good God, though, because it's a God that doesn't care for you. Money never died for you. Yet how many people will die for money? So Jesus says you can't worship both. You can worship money or you can worship God. But here's the beautiful thing. This God was willing to die for you. Money didn't care about you. Money will leave you. Money won't attend your funeral. Actually, people will ask you for more money at your funeral. A sad reality. And so this is the way that Jesus says this. A beautiful line in Matthew 6. If you've never read it, I don't want to spoil it too much for you, but it says this: don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow can worry about itself. Seek first the kingdom of heaven and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Purity of heart literally means priority of heart. What is the priority of my heart? What is my focus? If I choose to live and serve for God or for some other goal, and I think at the core of this, what it is actually calling me to is not to just a part of Jacob, not to just 30 minutes of Jacob, not just to a day of Jacob, but to Jacob's entire life. His working life, his resting life, his family life, his church life. And if these things could actually be aligned in my whole life given to him, what would actually happen to me? Happiness. What would happen to my world? Happiness. If applied, it is truly contagious. And as I will conclude now, flourishing, if lived this way, is creative. It's creative. We saw it here in this fantastic analogy with popcorn. Any analogy that involves food is a good analogy. Jesus, after his Beatitudes, if we think to the popcorn image, he says, you are the salt of the earth. You are the salt of the earth. Salt at its core is supposed to enhance. It's supposed to be part of. It's supposed to create. Not from nothing, but from something. And so if he says to us, you are the salt of the earth, he's inviting us to go into our world, to take this happiness, this message of his, and to go, you can hear the final words of Matthew's gospel, to go into all the world and to make it enhance, to make it more beautiful, to make it better. If Jacob walks into the room, does he make everybody miserable? It's a good litmus test to just take a moment when somebody walks in the room, what's the feeling of the room? I hope that when I walk into the room, I actually attract other people to Jesus, not repel them, not discuss them, not tell them, oh man, can't stand that guy. He just talks about himself all the time. He just thinks about himself all the time. Jesus' way is so different. Our church's goal is to draw community into a loving relationship with Jesus. And I think loving relationships reproduce. They reproduce. They create. They bring life. And so, this Sermon on the Mount is intended for us to not just read it and go, wow, that's a beautiful saying. Blessed are those who mourn, they shall be comforted. I need to knit that and put that above my bathroom sink and read it every day. No, Jesus expects us to live this. And when it's lived, look at what it can do. After Jesus rose, after Jesus left to go to the Father, it says that his disciples continued on his message and his mission and his method. Because when brought before the council who killed Jesus, who put him to death weeks before, they see these men standing there who smell like, who look like, who talk like Jesus. And this is what they describe them as. They recognize these men, Peter and John, that they had been with Jesus. The encouraging thing is a line before it even says that they recognize that they had not been taught, they're not learned men. Maybe their language was not perfect. Maybe they weren't charismatic, but something hit them that these guys look a lot like Jesus. What would it look like if I was exuding the way of Jesus? Would people be able to see it? Well, I think the first step is a very important step. When Brett gave me those keys, I could have sat in the driver's seat and said, this is my seat. I'm going to stay here forever. Nobody will ever get to drive this car again. It's a rental car, but, follow along with this silly analogy. But what he did by giving me power in that moment to drive the car, He gave me a power to drive, but he gave me the power also to pass the keys. And it was a couple days later that Tash, a pastor from Mildura, she actually said to me, I've never driven in America. Do you think I could do it? I responded to her, no, you're not trained yet. You're still an intern. No, imagine if I did. Point missed. Instead, I said, sure, just please don't kill me and I'll be fine with it. So I gave her the keys and I sat there patiently in the passenger seat, and she started driving the van. And she was a better driver than me. But imagine if I had hoarded that to myself. The call of a disciple is not to be a disciple who's saved and made it. A disciple makes a disciple. And Jesus is a genius, isn't he? This is the best method. Imagine if he gave just a book and said, keep reading this and keep passing it on. Well, that would be good. But what he also did was said, you are my book. He looked in Matthew's face. He looked in John's face, and he says, you will be my disciples. As I was sent by the Father, I'm now sending you, he says. And he looks into your face and into my face and invites you to do the same. And you know what? This is a beautiful way to live. Ask yourself the question, who am I saved for? If Jesus came to save me, why did he do it for me? Was it just for me? Or was this for my family and my friends and for my enemies? I'm not transformed to gloat. I'm transformed to give glory to God. That's why he ends with that beautiful parable. You are to be the light of the world. A light set on a hill will bring light to all the neighboring areas. In the same way, you are to let your works shine so that your Father in heaven may receive the glory. And I think that is just the most beautiful thing. In conclusion, I want to tell you this about the Lang Lang effect. The Lang Lang effect is something that has swept through China. You're listening to Lang Lang right now. Lang Lang is a piano player. He's a master pianist. He has spent time playing all over the world. If they want the best piano player, they call Lang Lang. And Lang Lang, when he started off his piano career, he was 2 years old. His dad was the one constantly behind him. And Lang Lang even says it was very military, because his dad was out of the Chinese military. And so he was very oppressive. But he said to him, you keep playing. And so they would play piano together for 20 minutes, and then they would go and watch Tom and Jerry's. And Tom and Jerry, the cat and mouse chasing each other, they would watch this cartoon, and he would see one scene that his father would show him over and over again of the cat playing while the mouse was fighting with him. And he just said, wow, playing the piano is cool. It really hit him as a 5-year-old. And so you see these videos of him playing 10 times better than any piano player I've ever seen as a 5-year-old. The interesting thing was, and I can't understand this, his piano teacher said to him, you're no good. You got no ability. Don't come back here. And he sent him out, and he never let him come and play with him again. His dad sold so much stuff. They were a poor family. He sold, I think, a car. He sold off some of his key equipment that he needed, and he bought his son a piano to start playing at home. A dad doing that for his son. This is love. This is true love. This is what it means to build in other people. Well, Lang Lang now, he's the world-renowned piano player. And the reason they call it the Lang Lang effect, of the 40 to 50 million piano players in the world, learning the piano amongst children, 90% of those people are in China. The most pianos produced by a country is China. They cannot get the pianos out fast enough because the kids just want to learn to play piano because they want to be like Lang Lang. Can you see the power of your influence in someone else's life? Can you see how creative and beautiful it is? First, as a father who would give everything for his son, but then for this son to impress the world. And I can't help but just see a reflection of our story today with Jesus. Jesus is the way of living, the best way of living. God gave everything for us to have him. And it's exciting and it's attractive. And if you are his disciple, it will impact your life for good. Do you want to be happy? Because I know I do want to be. And the greatest promise comes at the very end of the book. I am with you always to the end of the age. May you be his disciple. May you exude an influence. May you go out into this world and show what it means to be a follower of Jesus.